you. To attend this big congress. It's my third trip to India, and each time I have a good time. Actually, if you read the news, either from India or from China, they were always talking about the economic growth. So it's predicted that the growth rate will be below 7 in China this year, but will be beyond 8% or even more in India. So there's always this fight between the economic growth, but also there's a fight between the prevalence of diabetes. So in 2007, 2008, we had a big survey, and we got the current prevalence of diabetes. But surprisingly, in 2010, there was another paper published, increased the prevalence of diabetes further, which shocked the whole world. Let's see this. So this is our study, which was published several years ago in New England Journal of Medicine. And we show that prevalence of diabetes using the OGTT WHO criteria is about 10%. In that study, we also found that pre-diabetes prevalence using that WHO criteria is about 15%. And in 2010, Dr. Ning from Shanghai published a study with like 2 times of participants, around 100,000 individuals, and they show that prevalence diabetes was 11.6%, and then half of the population were pre-diabetes. So this also create controversial among the investigators question about the methodology in the 2 studies, where there's a big difference, especially in pre-diabetes prevalence. So if you look at the prevalence from 2008 to 2010, there's a sharp increase, about roughly 2%. And then if you translate into the number of individuals with diabetes, is increased from 92 million to above 110 million in China. So if you look at examine the methodology that we and others use in these 2 studies, you can see there's a big difference. For example, in our study, we just used the WHO criteria. We use OGTT to detect the diabetes, and we use a fasting glucose of 6.1 as a cutoff for diagnosing pre-diabetes, where in this study they're using an American ADA guideline recommended fasting glucose cutoff of 5.6. Also, in this study published JAMA, they introduced HbA1c as a diagnosed criteria. HbA1c of 5.7 to 6.4 is a diagnosed cutoff for pre-diabetes, whereas HbA1c of above 6.5 as a cutoff for diabetes. So within this mixture of both A1C based and OGTT based criteria, they gave increased prevalence of almost 2% in diabetes, and also a sharp increase of 35% of pre-diabetes. So what might attribute to difference in diabetes prevalence? So is the prevalence increase for real? Obviously, we can see there's a big methodology difference in terms of screening for diabetes. The addition of HbA1c to diagnose criteria for diabetes definitely is another factors that create a discrepancy between the two studies. For example, if we look at the table from the JAMA paper, actually the previously diagnosed diabetes the prevalence is 11.6 as they reported. But if you look at the previous diagnosed diabetes, the 3.5, which is roughly the same as we found it in our study. And also, if you look at the numbers that diagnosed by the WHO recommended criteria, it gave you 6.2. So if you put these two together, so exactly the same prevalence as we found it in 2007 and 2008. The HbA1c alone, which means those individuals that it's normal according to OGTT, but abnormal according to HbA1c criteria, give you a 2% increase of diabetes. We think that the prevalence of diabetes, if we use OGTT diagnosed criteria, actually didn't increase within 3 years. It's another factor that HbA1c that give you a further increase of prevalence of diabetes. It's the same case in prediabetes. So our question is, what is the unique feature of the subpopulation with abnormal HbA1c but with normal OGTT? So with this question, we looked at this from the data that we generated from a Pinggu metabolic syndrome study. This is a population-based study. So we randomly selected individuals from a town which is around 80 kilometers north of Beijing. It's a town with a very stable population, with half the population living in city area, and then half the population living in mountainous area. So it's a population with 400,000 residents, and then we sampled around 4,000 from that population. So we use OGTT to diagnose diabetes. In addition, we also measure other parameters, including the CT scan, optimal CT scan for diagnosing the liver, fatty liver. For today's talk, I'm just going to give you our analysis on the HbA1c related issues. So we have an equal number of basically male and female, and then we have slightly higher individuals from rural population as compared with the population from community, which basically like the cities. We used a diagnosis criteria recommended by the WHO, and then also the ADA criteria for diagnosing diabetes using the HbA1c. So here's the prevalence of diabetes diagnosed by OGTT. The pre-diabetes prevalence is around 23%. It's quite high. Even this is in the so-called rural part of Beijing. And then we found that the diagnosed diabetes is 6.2, and then there are 10% of newly diagnosed diabetes. So by adding these two together, we roughly have a prevalence of diabetes around 16% in that population, which is quite high. If you think this is the prevalence of is higher than average level in China. Okay, here let me show you the table. So this is a population characteristic by a different diagnosis method in prediabetes. So we had about 380 individuals that can be picked up by OGTT diagnosed criteria, base diagnosed criteria, and then equal number of individuals that didn't meet the OGTT glucose-based criteria, but meet the HbA1c base criteria, which is HbA1c between 5.7 and 6.4. And then there are a less number of individuals that meet the both criteria. Actually, from this table, you can see that the HbA1c alone increased the prevalence of prediabetes 100%. But if you look at this population with HbA1c diagnosed prediabetes, but OGTT normal, they have a slightly lower level of hemoglobin. And also, they tend to have, but if you look at the DI, which is the index of basal function, they actually have a higher DI than either OGTT diagnosed diabetes, and then those individuals that meet two criteria. So they, in terms of basal function, they have the best basal function. And also, if you look at the MCV, they have a lower level of MCV and higher level of RDW, which is also something that indicating anemia. We also measure the ferritin. They have significantly lower level of ferritin, which further support that something wrong with the like anemic conditions. So we have the same picture, even though we have small number of individuals that meet the HbA1c diagnosed criteria, but OGTT normal. They also have the same picture. For example, they have a lower HB levels, hemoglobin levels. They tend to also have a higher basal function, but their MCV is low, and they have a higher RDW, and then significantly lower ferritin levels. So we did a correlation linear regression analysis. Clearly, there's a negative correlation between the HB hemoglobin and then the HbA1c levels. Here is the analysis to look at the relationship by adjusting for other risk factors between the MCV and HbA1c. Clearly, you can show there's a negative correlation between the MCV and HbA1c, which is inconsistent with what we found in hemoglobin. And also, there's a positive correlation between the RDW levels and HbA1c levels. We didn't see a clear correlation between the ferritin levels and the HbA1c, because we believe that RDW might be a phenotype rather than it's more closer to the phenotype of clinic anemic conditions. Actually, there was a report from this country, from investigators from India, that they also found that there's a spurious high prevalence of prediabetes diagnosed by HbA1c in young Indians, partially explained by hemoglobin A1c factors, hematological factors, and iron deficiency anemia. In this study, they also found that for those individuals with normal glucose tolerance, but higher HbA1c levels, they also tend to have a higher RDW levels and a high prevalence of anemic individuals, and also their hemoglobin levels were relatively low, but significantly low. So it's the same picture as we found in China. We believe that in this study, we found that the increase in HbA1c and glucose levels is paralleled in this population, possibly due to the relationship between HbA1c. And some researchers indicate that iron deficiency anemia, especially pointed out from study from India, is associated with lower HbA1c, Hb, and higher HbA1c due to the low turnover of Hb. In anemic conditions, the hemoglobin turnover is getting slower, and then gives us more chance to expose to the high glucose levels. This is not just a problem in China, India, because in these developing countries, the individuals with anemic conditions, the proportion of individuals with anemic conditions are high. But even in the United States, the iron deficiency anemia is a common disease in the Chinese, not only in the Chinese population, but also in other populations. So this also has implications for the other developed countries. So using HbA1c in people with iron deficiency anemia might lead to the misdiagnosis of diabetes and prediabetes. But our study shows even in individuals without obvious clinic anemic conditions, this might be still a problem. The further study definitely is needed to evaluate the usefulness of HbA1c in diagnosing diabetes in China, possibly in other parts of the world. So in conclusion, based on our study results, it's indicated that using HbA1c as a diabetes diagnosis criteria is associated with increased prevalence of diabetes, and especially prediabetes. There were a recent study from Korea also indicating these conditions. The increase is due to a unique group with higher HbA1c, but the glucose level will not meet the OGTT-based criteria. And this unique group demonstrates a moderate elevated level of HbA1c and a lower hemoglobin MCV, and lower level of ferritin, but higher level of RDW. So what will be the clinical implication? I think this need to be, we need more study, not only coming from China, India, from Korea, but also from other parts of the world. And with this, we really need to evaluate what will be the impact of HbA1c based criteria on the prevalence of prediabetes, diabetes. Whether this give you a wrong prediction or give you a wrong impression of the current situation of prediabetes, diabetes in the world. So I think with more data, we might need to revise the current criteria based on HbA1c. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much.